What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. We got a bit of an SOS here. Essentially, why am I not getting better on the guitar? The eternal question. I know all about it. I'll talk about personal experience, but we all go through this. So don't be alarmed kind of situation if you're feeling like this. It happened right over there. Essentially, I was sitting there one day and I was thinking to myself, every time I do solos and stuff like that, they're well played. The technique is sound. It's fast, it's confident, but boring and predictable. There's clearly like this huge gap in my playing, because when I play, it doesn't sound like when George Lynch plays or Van Halen or someone else that I really respect. There's some sort of mojo that's missing. So I was like, okay, good times. So I was like, okay, I got to sit down and start to really reevaluate what it is that I'm doing. And then a couple months later, I'm still running into this problem, and I'm over there working on the 8-string classical, working on a Bach suite, watching Conan the Barbarian. Basically, there's the scene where he gets captured by Thulsa Doom at the Mountain of Power, and they're talking about the riddle of steel, and he's like, what's steel compared to the flesh that wields it? And then I just stopped playing and stared at the TV, and it just clicked. And I'm like, it's true. Do you ever really think about what it is that you're playing? That's what's missing. Like sort of guided vision. You kind of go into this automaton mode and just play random stuff, which is why it comes across sort of haphazardly. But once you start to employ, some gray matter, if you will, and have a direction and sort of a general idea about where you want your solo to go, well, obviously at that point, the results significantly improve. So there's a disconnect for most people with respect to the mind and the hand. And that existed for me for like 25 years. And that's got to be the biggest one. It doesn't just come naturally. You have to marry up the theoretical concepts with the actual fretboard. So when somebody's like, okay, play all the diminished arpeggios starting in the Locrian position, you should be able to play 4 diminished arpeggios ascending up the diatonic scale until you get back to the Locrian position or an octave higher. That's what I'm talking about. That's a music concept. You're essentially doing the inversions of a diminished arpeggio, and you're playing them basically ascending up the diatonic scale. So you're going to get one at 7, you're going to get one at 2, you're going to get one at sharp 5, and you're going to get another one at 7 again, right? So that's kind of the point there, is this recognition that information has to be able to, first of all, be understood, but then taken from up here in the abstract and applied to the instrument and then executed using the techniques necessary to play it. And then the next question is well, when would I use that? Right? And you're off to the races, right? So you have to think about what you're playing. You have to make a decision about what it is that you want to play. You have to kind of pre-plan stuff, but you have to do it in such a way that you can basically put the ideas together in fractions of a second. And it just takes a lot of practice and experimentation. But as long as you sort of keep that in mind, well, you'll do fine. Next on the list is the inability to sort of recognize sort of guitar infotainment and information. So this was another big one. I was spending time sort of trying to learn stuff on the internet, but most of the videos would teach me a lick or a riff or something like that. And it's not that they're bad or anything like that, but I'm not really, they're empty calories. You know what I mean? Musically speaking. And then I realized, when I watched this really dense video on diminished theory that's, this is real information telling you all the important stuff, that I was just like, I was just shutting down mentally. You know what I mean? It's like when you're in class and you're just pulling one of these here, falling asleep because the teacher's just droning on. And I was just like, oh my God. And that's when I noticed it, actually. I was like, I watched this guitar infotainment video and spend 15 minutes learning this silly lick and then 2 weeks afterwards practicing it up to speed, but you can't sit through 3 minutes of this diminished theory video. And I'm like, and you wonder why you can't have like a guided vision or direction when you're playing to sort of steer your communication with what it is that you want to say with the audience. That's a mystery to you. It shouldn't be, right? So there it is. You got to be able to essentially, control the empty calories and not spend so much time just watching music videos that are designed to entertain you. They have like, some stuff in there that'll be useful in a very limited capacity. But the real videos, they're a lot more boring. And so if you can sit through them and stuff like that, you'll probably learn something of value. And if you watched a video and you're like, I have no idea what that person said, then if you're still interested, then you should start by using that as a leaping off point to track down other videos to break down the more simple sort of concepts, which of course there's basically a video on almost anything now. So start there and then work your way back up to the previous video so that when you watch it this time, you actually have some measure of understanding. I had to watch the diminished one about 6 times before I actually understood just fractions of it, the early parts. And I'm like, okay, well, that's all I need to know right now until I can take this information and make it usable on the fretboard. Again, getting back to the previous sort of, situation where we're talking about not just having a bunch of useless information floating upstairs in the noggin that you can actually use in a real world context on the actual fretboard. Right? So this wasting of time by watching this video when you could watch this one while you're sitting there with your instrument, really trying to be like, okay, work through it at the same time as the video. And when you get stuck or whatnot, and if you did 5 minutes of the video and you're like, okay, I can't do anymore, and then you feel like, watching some guitar infotainment, sure, go ahead. You know what I mean? You did your duty and that's enough. Just make sure you stay diligent with it and you keep up with it. And eventually, after the span of years, you'll assimilate this information and be like, man, am I ever glad I did that? Because my playing sounds so much better now that I can incorporate this incredibly useful music concept all over the fretboard. Wow, who'd that benefit? And all it took was me to be like, exhibit some patience. Next is music math or musical equations. I was watching a documentary about these dorky kids that do the math Olympic stuff. And, they're doing this puff piece on the one kid. And he's like, I went to school and then all of a sudden, when I'm in grade 6, I'm already doing grade 12 math. And then I surpassed the teacher in grade 8, in the high school. It was pretty awesome. But then he's like, basically, if I wanted to keep going with my education, I had to come up with my own problems. I couldn't just ask people to be like, give me a problem to solve, because I was already better than they were. And they couldn't actually come up with problems that would give me a challenge, mathematically speaking. And that is another light that got flicked on. I'm just like, it's true. If you can't come up with your own sort of musical equations and whatnot, what are you really practicing? How do you reconcile this information that you just learned and now figured out on the fretboard? Now you have to be like, okay, dominant 7, it's a transitionary arpeggio, diminished. Transitionary arpeggio. Transitionary means I go from one to the next. So I'm playing the first degree and I want to go to the second degree. If I did a flat 2 there, I could probably play diminished, but you could also play major 7 or dominant 7. Well, what are those? Music math. Okay, you're like, I want to go from the first degree of a major scale to the second degree. Ionian to Dorian. But I've got this one here in between. What arpeggio in this case, it could be a scale, it could be a pentatonic, it could be a whole bunch of stuff, or maybe a diminished 6th scale. I'll leave it up to you, but in this case, an arpeggio, what arpeggio could I play at this flat 2 position to unify the first degree and the second degree? And then you'll be like, oh, there's 3 choices, or 4, or 9, or whatever it is. And there it is. It puts your feet on the path and you can start doing that. How do I link up a 1-4-5 in a major key with a 2-5-1 in a minor key? Music math. How do I go from a 2-5-1 in a major key to a 2-5-1 in a minor key? Music math. Once you start thinking like that and then practicing to accomplish the goal of figuring that simple problem out, I guarantee you, you will be 100 times better in 1 year. You'd be like, choose a key, A major. Be like, I want to do a 2-5-1. That would be B minor 7, moving to E7, moving to A major 7. There you go. You see what I'm saying? 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that, even though I was highly educated with respect to music. But I can now. Why? Because I can visualize the fretboard in my mind, and it's 10 times easier. Why? Because I started to take this abstract information and see it on the fretboard. It's not the 5th fret anymore. That's the note A on the low E string. That's the note D on the A string. Did I say A string twice? E, A, you get it. So there it is, okay? This music math stuff is insanely important. The ability for you to come up with your own challenges, musically speaking, and then act on them. That way, you're getting real practice value and you're practicing things that you're interested in and you're good at, instead of just being like something else. When you're ready for a challenge, that's when you go to the internet, you learn some new technique or some new bobble, and you throw it in there and you start messing around with that. But initially, and basically for the majority of the time, you're the one that has to do that stuff. Stop going to the internet to be like, show me what to do. Figure it out for yourself. Next, patience. I saw this. Actually, there's a weird medical study that like people that are more patient live longer. How you would figure that one out, I don't know. But it is what it is. Maybe it's based on monks or something. They do meditation. I don't know. The point being here is that people want to pay off really fast, and usually it's too much too soon kind of deal. So you got to just be patient. If the best guitar players in the world, like a Paul Gilbert, took like maybe 10 years to get to his level when he was doing like the Racer X stuff, arguably when he was just at his most terrifying, it'll take you 15 to 20. Okay, he's not mortal. We're mortal. So you have to be patient. If you want to shave years, then you have to basically have an excellent practice regime. Practice creatively and diligently, where you maximize all of the sort of pushing the faders up simultaneously with rhythm sort of considerations, with note selection, with voice leading, with combination of elements. You see what I mean? Like, that's a lot of balls to juggle. Moving on. So once you start getting at that level, you can understand it gets difficult to manage all of the responsibilities, which of course can ultimately lead to you not sounding as good as you want to. So again, patience has to be part of it, because it just takes a while to be able to get skilled enough to be able to handle all that responsibility and manage all of those variables, and then put them in the proper sequence in split second and basically spit out the appropriate result. Nails it. Last but not least here is apathy. People get to a certain point, like they'll learn the pentatonic scale and then just shut it down. They're like, okay, it's good enough. But there's a very deep inherent danger with doing stuff like that, that eventually you just get tired of doing that stuff and you've given up so long, or basically haven't cultivated the learning mindset, meaning you're constantly looking for new ways to apply either old information or assimilate new information into the older systems that you're already very familiar with. So what I mean by that is, if you knew 3 notes per string in terms of the diatonic scale and the harmonic minor and all that good stuff, and you're like, well, where does this diminished sixth sort of Barry Harris scale factor into the major modes? Music math. There it is. It's up to you to sort of sit there and be like, okay, and get it done. You know what I mean? And if necessary, you'll have to fire up a backing track and be like, okay, here's a G major backing track. And you try it over G major and it sounds horrendous, but you move all the way up to like the flat third or something like that. Who knows? And you play it again and all of a sudden it sounds God tier. At that point there, it's up to you to be like, well, why? Or at least you should be asking that. And again, those are the types of unwritten music exercises you need to develop immediately to get better and avoid the dreaded, why am I not getting better? Because that's what makes you better. You're like, why do it at the flat 3 here? And if you can answer that question, or you keep asking questions like that until you can, job's done. Is there ever a situation, realistically speaking, when you can make the claim that less information is better than more? You know, having a more solid understanding of something is going to be less advantageous than actually knowing more about it? I don't think so, right? And apathy, of course, factors right into that, because there's so many applications, say, for the minor pentatonic scale and whatnot. You know what the problem is? 90% of the blues players today are not original. They're just basically playing the same tired licks that Stevie Ray Vaughan made famous in the 80s. And he's really at the tail end of another great sort of insane list of blues people that effectively discovered and whatever, explored the entirety of the blues landscape. There is not a single aspect of the blues that's left to be explored, you know? Like nothing. It's not like the ocean. It's like your backyard. You know what I mean? And that's the problem. Even though that they're great players and stuff like that, as far as the music is concerned, unless you're really into the blues, I find it comes across as incredibly contrived now. Not even trying to actually add new elements anymore. You know what I mean? Now, listen, that's just my personal opinion. Send me your hate mail if that's what you want, but at the end of the day, that's really what the issue here is that they're like, okay, I'll get really fast at playing these blues runs, and I'm just like, it's been done. It's done. It's just done. Even the really fast stuff, which honestly at this point it's kind of cliched. And it, you know what I mean? And there it is. That's a very good, people think when I say apathy, it means, oh no, they just give up or whatever else it is, or they're just not very motivated to do this. No, it's when you think that you can, and you do get good. That's just it. These people are good guitar players. I'm not making the inference that they're not good guitarists or musicians or anything else like that. They are. They're very good. But what they're saying with their instrument has been said millions of times. And so I find it difficult to, you know, be compelled by their music because it's just so generic at this point. You see what I mean? The skill factor is irrelevant because I've already heard that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, even at blistering lightning speeds. And honestly, I've seen guys like Sean Lane tear it up with the blues. So let's just be real, man. Like it once you see that, you're just like, yeah, you know, I this is in the stratosphere, man. I can't take this seriously anymore. It's just like, it's so good. It's good for sure. But this is like, wow. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to do it, then wow me, not just like, yeah, it's good. You know, you feel me? Be like, yo, man, destroy the fretboard with some diminished action in there too, or some diminished scales. And then all of a sudden you would change the dynamic fundamentally and it would sound way better. And dominant 7 too. You know what I mean? Just two fundamental advances, just those two things which are integral to the blues, really. would make all the difference. But they don't. They don't even bother to try to incorporate those elements. So comes across as ho-hum. So don't make those mistakes, essentially going through them again, the disconnect between the mental and the physical. Think about what it is that you're doing, where you are, what you're playing, what your options are, and what you're going to do next, and what you just did previous. And hopefully exercising some measure of, mental control over things like synergy. Right? Do those things work together? Or am I just playing random stuff? Even if it was, do these two things. Technically, you can do that. Yes, technically, you can do that. Did it sound good? No. Then synergy was missing. So there's always another mountain to climb. That's the way that goes. Know the difference between guitar infotainment and actual information, and make sure that you spend as much time assimilating information or learning about new or existing concepts on the instrument that are relative to you, so that you can deepen your understanding instead of just wasting your time sort of consuming empty mental calories. We'll leave it at that. Start implementing the idea of music math. Asking a question and then figuring out the answer. You're like, I want to add a chord. I would be like, I want to do a 1-4-5 in the key of B major, but I want to add a setup chord before the 4 chord and before the 5 chord before going back to the 1 chord. There's another version using chords. Okay? That is insanely important. And then try to rationalize why it is exactly you can use this chord here before the 4 chord, and why you can use this chord here before you play the 5 chord, or a substitute chord, or something else, or use voice leading, or whatever it is. Be patient. Just keep working at it, but when you are working on things, make sure that you streamline your learning process so everything's engaged at the same time. The physical, the mental, you're employing new information, you're practicing new creative ideas, and you're staying diligent. Last but not least, don't get apathetic. Once you get good at something, start taking on other responsibilities. Once you get good at the pentatonic scale, start working on 3 notes per string. If you're already good at those 2 things, factor in the classical method. When you're good at those things, diminish scales. When you're good at those things, harmonic minor, melodic minor, Hungarian minor. The list is endless. And then start to reconcile that information to be like, this is how it all layers over top of each other. That's insanely important. Or I can use this chord as a substitute, or this scale as a substitute for this one. Whichever one fits the bill, doesn't really matter. And as you can see, that all of a sudden exponentially increases the amount of work necessary to figure it all out. And that's just it. Every day you practice, you're knocking down one of these bricks. And then after 20 years, you will be the shred lord. Not just a good musician, not just a competent musician. You will be an absolutely badass musician that just rips people's faces off. People are like, that's the best musician I've ever saw in the flesh, ever. So you got to give it time. Keep your nose to the grindstone. Don't expect too much, but at the same time, start to reflect on things that have nothing to do with music, that affect your mindset. And once you start engaging your mind as much as you sort of using your will to drive the physicality of learning on the instrument, because let's be honest, you're in robot mode there. Oh, put my finger here. Oh, read this scale chart, do this tab. Come on, that's not real learning. That's just monkey see, monkey do. Once you really put your feet on the path to real learning, I guarantee you, not only will music become way more interesting, but you will be way more interested in it, because you can do the things you want to do, not the things someone else told you you have to do. Now you're in the driver's seat. Now you're playing the improvisations, you're making the choices, and eventually, over the span of a few years, you get much more comfortable with it, and of course, boom, Music just becomes a way of life, like reading the newspaper or whatever else. You're like, they're going to have a beer and play some tunes or whatever that is. And when you do that, it's this incredible rush because you're no longer obstructed from just expressing yourself. Now you can just pick up the instrument and make it sing. I appreciate every single one of you. Develop your mind as much as you develop the physicality on the instrument because it's the thing that'll set you free. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you in the next one.